Order. Bambos Charalambos to move the motion.
I beg to move that this House is considered International Day of Education, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, Ms. Faz. This Saturday, the 24th of January, will mark the 8th International Day of Education, which was established by the United Nations to highlight the importance of education for peace and development worldwide. Nobody can doubt the transformative power of education in empowering individuals, opening up life-changing opportunities, strengthening communities, and creating a more peaceful world. The right to an education is enshrined in Article 26 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which begins with the line, "Everyone has a right to education." Unfortunately, still today, there are many millions of children globally who are not in education. There's been great progress in access to education across the world, and the UK has played a powerful role as one of the world's most influential donors, advocates, and innovators in global education. However, that progress has slowed in recent years against the backdrop of successive cuts in education aid budget and an increasingly dangerous world of conflict and climate change. The UK has played a unique role in basic education. Foundational learning provides the building blocks for essential life skills, such as literacy, numeracy, and personal development, but there is a serious concern that basic education will be one of the most hardest hit areas by cuts in aid, where historically the UK and the US governments have been its biggest donors. The Centre for Global Development have highlighted the catastrophic impact that not funding basic education would have internationally, and I would urge the Minister to consider this an area of high priority for the UK government when considering global education funding. There's evidence to show how effective investing in basic education could be. New data released this week from the FCDO-funded What Works Hub shows that for global education, achieving universal foundational learning could increase global GDP by $196 trillion over the next 20 years. Just yesterday, I joined parliamentarians and campaigners to celebrate 25 years of the Send My Friend to School campaign and the efforts of millions of young people to push for the right to education globally. And I want to thank everyone involved in making that event a huge success, particularly young people, for their impressive advocacy. At the event, I had the chance to speak to the former Deputy Speaker of the Afghan Parliament, Fawzia Koofi, who has dedicated her political career to defending women and girls' rights to education in Afghanistan. She told us that when her husband was imprisoned by the Taliban, she would write letters to the Taliban asking for his release. And when she spoke to a prison guard, he said to her that she should count herself lucky to be able to read and write. So many of the girls that she grew up with did not continue their education beyond grade 6 and would not learn how to read and write. And for her, it was receiving that education that gave her the opportunity to become who she is today. Investing in education is one of the smartest long-term investments we can make for global stability. Improvements in learning opportunities contribute directly to the achievement of sustainable development and the empowerment of women and girls. One additional year of education can reduce the risk of conflict by up to 20%, with particularly strong effects when girls and women have equal access to learning. And research has shown that improvements in education have powered half of global economic growth in the past 50 years. The United Nations set a specific strategic development goal for education, SDG 4, which aims to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all by 2030. But with over 270 million children not in education across the globe, it is highly unlikely that this goal will be met. I note that the International Partnership Network for Education have also recently put out a statement expressing their solidarity and need for global cooperation to tackle the challenges to achieve Sustainable Development Goal 4. It is imperative that we also take urgent action to help meet this goal. But as we speak, global education is facing a serious threat as a result of sharp cuts to the ODA budget. Aid to education is projected to fall by around 24%, or $3.2 billion globally, by the end of 2026. And unless this course is reversed, there will remain significant barriers to accessing education in the poorest parts of the world. As I've already mentioned, according to UNESCO, over 270 million children are out of school. Cuts to the educational aid budget could push a further 6 million children out of school by the end of this year. In some contexts, including in Chad and Sudan, education in emergencies funding has already been cut by up to 90%. And these figures reflect real choices that are impacting strides that have been made in expanding access to education across the globe. The Global Partnership for Education has been instrumental in addressing these challenges against the backdrop of aid cuts. It supports partner countries by designing and financing national education plans, strengthening systems, and aligning donor and partner efforts behind one coherent reform programme. In Somalia, where girls' enrolment in secondary school is a mere 9.7%, and large numbers of girls drop out due to discriminatory gender norms like early pregnancy, early marriage, and involvement in household work, GP-funded programmes to enhance learning of Somali children in the federal member states of Gurmudug, Hirshabelle, Mogadishu, and Banadir, constructing and rehabilitating classrooms and wash facilities. As a result of their work, 400 new classrooms across 147 schools were constructed, 394 classrooms were rehabilitated, and 669 were provided with new furniture, including 15 sets of desks. This supported access to education for over 33,000 out-of-school children, with girls' enrolment increasing by 59%. And between 2026 and 2030, GPE will double the co-financing that it attracts to $10 billion, reaching over 300 million more children and boosting UK investment beyond what can be achieved by bilateral programmes alone. Yet as aid is set to fall, payments to multilateral partners like GP have been delayed. The government will soon decide whether to maintain its future financial supports to GP for this period in the coming weeks. By investing in GP, the UK can help prepare this generation to drive prosperity in their own countries and strengthen the foundations of a safer, more stable and more livable world. Another issue I want to focus on is emergencies, and education emergencies in particular. In a world that has become increasingly dangerous, education protects children from violence and exploitation, lowers long-term humanitarian and recovery costs, and helps mitigate conflict and displacement pressures. Financing education emergencies supports the UK's priorities on peace and security, migration, climate resilience, and violence against women and girls. Yet with the risk of further cuts to education aid budget, climate crisis and conflicts are threatening to destroy any chances of children getting access to an education. Currently, 234 million crisis-affected children require educational support globally, a 10 million increase in the last 2 years. Children in Africa and the Middle East face the largest impact, with millions of children looking at a disruption or cancellation of their education. An underlying cause of this is the climate crisis. As climate emergencies become more prevalent, children and families are being displaced from their homes and forced to take shelter elsewhere. When international aid comes in, it is often education that is deprioritised, despite being a lifeline for children in crisis. This means classrooms are left without teachers, learning materials or safe spaces, and a generation of children risk losing not just months but years of education at the very moment when stability and hope matter most. According to UNICEF, nearly 40 million children a year have their education interrupted by disasters and disease outbreaks following extreme weather events. Not only are children losing access to drinking water, healthcare and food, their education is being forgotten and they are being left vulnerable to violence and despair. Furthermore, in places like Sudan, which is experiencing the world's largest humanitarian and displacement crisis since records began, just shy of 12 million people are displaced internally or have fled to neighbouring countries. The civil war is leaving many children traumatised, uprooted from their communities and cut off from education and basic protection. This is increasing their risk of exploitation, early marriage and long-term poverty, and making it harder for the country to rebuild peace and stability for the future. Education Cannot Wait is a global fund dedicated to financing education in the world's most severe humanitarian crises, working in places such as Ukraine, Gaza, Sudan and Nigeria, investing in safe learning spaces, sustaining minimum education pathways and acting as a frontline protection measure for violence against women and girls. In South Sudan, Education Cannot Wait have worked with the Minister of General Education to expand equitable access to education and reduce the number of out-of-school children. Through their multi-year resilience programme, over 190,000 learners, 46% being girls, have gained access to formal and alternative education systems such as accelerated learning programmes. ECW funding provides tailored support to vulnerable girls, supports the distribution of dignity kits, strengthens school-based child protection systems, and expands safe learning spaces where girls feel protected and welcomed. However, we're in a situation where they have minimal funding commitments by the government for the upcoming replenishment for both GP and ECW. According to UNICEF, planned funding cuts for education in emergencies will mean that crisis-hit countries in Africa and the Middle East will lose over 10% of their national education budget. This will also impact teacher development and data systems, having a lasting impact on education due to a loss of skilled educators and gaps in data, making a recovery less likely, even if funding returns in the future. And that is why it's absolutely crucial that the government provides adequate funding for education aid, supporting organisations such as Education Cannot Wait, who are on the front line delivering education in emergencies. I have a few questions for the Minister before I conclude. The first relates to the government's commitments to education in emergencies. So I'd like to ask the Minister if he agrees with me that it's vital that as part of our humanitarian assistance that we provide, the provision of education in areas of conflict and climate emergencies must be absolutely fundamental. And when countries are emerging from conflict and climate emergencies, they need help to get themselves re-established. And so I'd like to ask the Minister if he could tell me if the government intends to support countries to transition from emergency education provision to national education systems, particularly if support mechanisms such as the Global Partnership for Education are reduced. And I'd also like to ask the Minister if the government will ensure that the ODA budget will be focused on foundational learning, where every lesson has the most transformative impact on a child's life chances. I'd also like to ask the Minister if you could tell me whether education will feature in this May's Future of Development Conference being hosted by the UK in May. The UK has always understood the importance of education. We championed girls' education before others. We fought for foundational learning when the world's attention risked drifting elsewhere. And we played a defining role in the creation of the Global Partnership for Education and Education Cannot Wait, which are some of the most effective engines for transforming education systems around the world. With a smaller aid budget, it's essential that the UK makes its money go further. And as we mark the UN International Day of Education, let us celebrate the huge strides that we've made in progressing access to education across the globe, but also be honest about the scale of the challenge that we face today. We find ourselves at a crossroads where the government can choose to continue their efforts in fighting for education for those who need it most, or abandon decades of hard work on the international stage. So let us step forward once again. Let us work together to invest in teachers, in systems, in safe and inclusive classrooms. Let's ensure that every child can learn and thrive, because when we invest in education, you don't just build schools, we build futures.
Great. Members are standing if they want to speak. The question is that this House has considered International Day of Education. Dr. Sam Rushworth.
Thank you, Mrs. Sparrows. It's a privilege to serve under your chairmanship. May I also thank my honourable friend, the member for Southgate and Wood Green, for an excellent speech, but also for the excellent event that he hosted this week with Send My Friend to School. I found that very moving to see so many young people, children, coming to Parliament to tell us to speak up for their values and their belief in global education. Prior to entering this place, I had the privilege of spending a few years as a teacher at a school in Rwanda, where I was doing my PhD research. And it was a world away from what we know as a school. I had a chalkboard at the front and a few pieces of chalk, and the children had a notebook and pens, and that was about the only resource that we had to deliver learning. But to this day, it always warms my heart when they reach out to me on social media to let me know how they're doing now, most of them in their mid-20s, being successful and thriving in the world. But I want to briefly tell you about one of the young men who attended that school. He was a genocide orphan who, after the genocide, found himself living at the rubbish dump in Kigali in the shell of a burnt-out car, where he would go out each day with other children and pick through for food to survive. After a few years of this, an American woman who was in the area got out of the car one day to give these street children, they're called Mayabobo, children of the street, some bread rolls. And this young man went up to her and said, "Please, I would like to go to school." And she felt moved to put him in the back of her taxi and take him to a local family who she trusted and pay them to put him through school. A few years later, at his school, another child was being bullied because he was poor, because he was scruffy and didn't have the school supplies. And remembering his experience as a street child, he formed a little charitable group in the school. They clubbed together to secretly put school supplies on this student's bed to help him through school. And from that act, they set up a charity at their school that now has chapters across the entire country, but also in North America and in Europe, to inspire young people. It's a youth-led charity to inspire young people to do good. This young man went on to get a scholarship to Harvard University. He did not mention his background because he wanted to be to have it meritocratically, but so meritocratically he got a scholarship to Harvard, and today he continues to do incredible work. But what that story really illustrates to me is not only the incredible success, but also how many children like him remain at the rubbish dump, not given those opportunities. We know that globally, global education is facing cuts of £3.2 billion by the end of 2026, which is going to be severe, and the impact of that will be felt in an entire generation of children around the world. We also know that includes, sadly, UK cuts to our own aid, but may I say that the UK cannot and should not be expected to go it alone in terms of global education. And there are many other things that we need to do. One of the things that we know, for example, is that debt interest for countries in Africa, there are 34 countries in Africa spending more on debt interest every year than they spend on education and health. And that is a disgrace. And there is something that this Parliament could actually do to legislate to change that reality. And I hope that we would. I think we need to do more to encourage other countries who frankly could give more and don't, to step up. And we also need to build strong partnerships. It's strongly in our national interest to do so. One of the things that I've always noted as I've worked in international law, met many ministers in other countries, is how often those ministers were educated in the UK. and how often they worked previously at a university. Because unlike in this place, where we tend to appoint ministers who aren't necessarily specialists in their field, it's generally the case in the Global South that ministers come through the academic ranks and are a specialist in their area. How often they have views that were shaped by their time studying at a UK university or their relationship to a UK university, and which is incredibly important. Other institutions that we should be greatly proud of include VSO, who do important work in education around the world, and the British Council. And this is a really important part of UK soft power. And as the world is changing and the world becomes more volatile and Britain's place in the world is shrinking, there are some big players in the world today who don't share our democratic values, who don't share our belief in human rights, who are positioning themselves to sweep up influence across the global south. And it is in that context that we really do need to think, as they often do, of a 100-year plan and what that would look like to shape the world in our image, to have people learning our language and to have more people feeling a great affinity to this country, which is another important role that we can play by investing in education. And I'll conclude where the others need to get in, just by really appealing for this to be a bigger part of UK thinking about development, those higher education partnerships that are so crucial, but also those school-to-school partnerships, and making development education a part of our national curriculum. That was what was so heartwarming this week at the Honourable Members' event, was to see children who were globally aware citizens, who wanted to connect with children in other parts of the world and who wanted to work together to shape a better world. And they had some strong messages for us, and I think we need to listen to them.
Andrew Rossendale.
Thank you, Ms Vaz, and as always it's a great privilege to serve under your chairmanship, and I would also like to put on my record my thanks to the Honourable Member for Southgate and Wood Green, who has secured this timely debate this afternoon to coincide with the International Day of Education. Over the course of my 25 years as a member of this House, I have been extremely fortunate to have travelled to all parts of our planet, whether as part of the Foreign Affairs Committee that I served on for 15 years, the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association, which does excellent work, as we all know, the Inter-Parliamentary Union, NATO Parliamentary Assembly, the British-Irish Parliamentary Assembly, and most especially the Westminster Foundation for Democracy. And I served as a governor of that for 9 years, doing work in countries all around the world, together with various missions that I've taken part on with the Foreign and Commonwealth Office over the years, including to countries like Uganda and indeed to the British Indian Ocean Territory, would you believe? And I'll say a bit more about the Chagos Islands later. Through those travels, Ms Vaz, I have seen at first hand the impact that British education, cultural exchange and institutional engagement can have across the world. I also felt it right to participate in this debate today because I was due to respond on behalf of His Majesty's opposition as a shadow minister. While that is no longer the case, I am sure my honourable friend, the member for Spelthorne, will do justice to the role this afternoon, and I wish him well in his endeavours. Ms Vaz, education has the ability to transform lives, and ultimately it shapes the world in which Britain must operate. For generations, this country has been regarded as the workshop for global leaders, and the world's elites want to send their children to be educated here in the United Kingdom. Post-colonial leaders such as Lee Kuan Yew, Robert Menzies, Mahatma Gandhi, and contemporary leaders such as the great Tony Abbott and Shinzo Abe, the list goes on. It's very extensive, and we should take great pride that so many distinguished figures from around the world choose to be educated here or to send their families and children to be educated here in these British Islands. But what is clear is that our schools, our universities, our language and our great British culture have projected British influence further than any number of tanks or treaties could ever have done. And that influence has been built deliberately through institutions and scholarships that are respected across the globe. The Rhodes Scholarship, the Chevening Programme, the work of the Association of Commonwealth Universities, and the generations of Commonwealth scholars who have gone on to become leaders in politics, business, science, and civil society. And as chairman of the Commonwealth All-Party Parliamentary Group, I have seen just how thriving these networks of influence truly are. However, I am afraid that the Commonwealth itself and the bodies such as the Commonwealth of Learning are understood by successive governments, I have to say, simply as almost like a hangover of colonial times, something from the past, something that should belong in history. Now, I believe that this attitude is wrong and it needs to change. We should be proud of what Britain has achieved over the centuries, and we should continue with those traditions today. Of course I will.
Jim Shannon.
Madam Chair, can I commend the Honourable Gentleman for bringing forward the debate? I'm sorry I couldn't be here because I was in the chamber, but I'm very mindful that this is about, I know the focus of this is on what Britain does with education, but the other side of it is that there's many churches across all of this United Kingdom, Great Britain, and in my constituency who have built schools and universities from the churches themselves going the other way. And does the Honourable Member recognise the good work that those churches do in my constituency, that I know, the Elam Church in particular, who have built a hospital, a health centre, an education primary school, a secondary school, who are working on job training in farming as well. All these things are done from Newton Ards to Malawi, Newton Ards to Swaziland, Newton Ards to Zimbabwe, as an example of what can happen if we all look at some of the good things that are happening.
Well, Ms Vaz, that was a fine intervention from the honourable member, and I entirely endorse everything he said. One of the reasons why Britain has had so much outreach around the world is because of our Christian foundations, our Christian heritage, which is so important to uphold and to cherish. And of course, it has been Christian missionaries that have travelled the world and established schools and hospitals and universities and churches, helping countries far and wide and people of all religions. And I entirely endorse his examples from the constituency. My constituency too has many churches that does excellent work and supports causes around the world. So I thank my honourable friend for raising that point. And so, Ms Vaz, the Commonwealth is, I believe, a tangible force for good. I'm sure we can all agree with that. And it should be central to any government's foreign policy. A voluntary association bound by shared language, legal traditions and educational standards embodies the very arguments that are being debated here in Parliament this afternoon. And above all, it provides Britain a unique global reach that no other country enjoys. Commonwealth countries in every part of the world, not forgetting, of course, and including our cherished overseas territories and crown dependencies, like the British Indian Ocean Territory, which should remain a British territory. And so this has presented our great nation with an inheritance that is the envy of the world. But obviously, soft power only works when it also serves the national interest. And I'm afraid that is where this debate has to be honest. Too often, international education policy has drifted away from British priorities and towards fashionable global causes, administrated by bloated bureaucracies with little regard for value for money or outcomes. And so, my new party, Reform UK, believes in engagement with the world but on Britain's terms, not at our expense. Last month, in my previous role as Shadow Minister, I met with the British Council. They do invaluable work, and I wish to place that clearly on record. But what I heard should concern this House. Funding from the Foreign Office has still not returned to pre-pandemic levels. The British Council is being forced to consider the closure of up to 35 country offices, with 10 already lost during COVID. Just £20 million would stabilise the British Council network. Yet at the same time, this government appears perfectly relaxed, writing cheques, running into tens of billions for the handover of a British territory and betraying British people at the same time, based on questionable interpretations of international obligations that deliver nothing tangible for the British taxpayer. I certainly will.
To stick to the motion.
Certainly.
Dr. Sam Rushworth.
I thank the Judge for giving way. And just while he is on that point, we're all obviously aware of a letter that he wrote in 2020 in which he urged President-elect Joe Biden to do exactly what the government is doing. So would he say maybe why his opinion has changed on this matter?
Well, I'm so pleased he's raised it. And with your permission, Ms Vaz, if I could answer that point.
That we do have to stick to the motion,
Fine. I will simply
which
say
is
that
International
to the
Day of Education.
I will certainly do that.
Thank
if
you.
I could simply say one very brief thing to the Honourable Member. Letters written were part of an all-party parliamentary group, consensus of all parties in that group. I happen to be the chairman of that group. They weren't necessarily reflecting my opinions on everything, but it should always be self-determination that determines decisions.
Could you address the chair, please? Thank you.
So we are told that there is no money for this. Yet somehow we find the cash for all sorts of other things, for the housing of multiple people coming to this country who are coming illegally, for the failing digital ID experiment, and for a long list of projects that do nothing to strengthen Britain's position in the world and in promoting education. I'm sure we will shortly hear very warm words from the Minister about the importance of international education, and rightly so. But those words will ring hollow when the government is presiding, I'm afraid, over an erosion of Britain's ability to support education, influence and cultural engagement across the globe. What makes matters worse is that these cuts are being focused on the British Council offices in developed countries, countries that need our support more than most, places where English teaching may not be the primary objective, but where influence, network, science, culture and diplomacy absolutely are. And so the British Council is certainly not just an English teaching charity. Its stated aims foster cultural, scientific, technological and educational cooperation with the United Kingdom. Undermining that mission, Ms Vaz, weakens Britain. However, Reform UK is not calling for a blank cheque, far from it. If Britain is to help to educate the world, then that education must champion the United Kingdom and its values, free speech, our model of parliamentary government and the rule of law. And it must never put Britain second. We should be funding programmes not to apologise for our history, undermine our own institutions or promote ideologies fundamentally hostile to our way of life. Nor should international education be used as a backdoor for uncontrolled migration or permanent settlement. Students should come to Britain to learn and then return home as ambassadors for this country and assets to their peers. Certainly not numbers that disappear into a broken system that is already overstretched. And so, ahead of the International Day of Education, I say yes, education changes lives, but it also helps to shape geopolitics. If we hollow out our soft power while pouring money into symbolic global gestures, we will wake up, as I'm afraid we have done for some time, poorer, weaker and less respected. Reform UK believes Britain should engage with all nations of the world and treat all countries with respect, working with all nationalities and all peoples for the best interests of humanity. but always in Britain's national interest. Our educational institutions and our global networks remain world-class, and dare I say, the best. The question is whether the government is willing to end the bipartisan policy of managed decline and once again put British cultural influence back on the map.
Monica Harding.
It is a pleasure to serve under your chairship, Ms Baz, and I want to pay tribute to the Honourable Member for Southgate and Wood Green for securing this debate today to mark the International Day of Education this Saturday. And I want to take the opportunity to pay tribute to all our very hard-working teachers and our schools in the UK, and especially in my own constituency of Esher and Walton. But this should be more than a moment of reflection, it must be a call to action. Education is a moral good, but it is also one of the most effective tools we have to prevent poverty, conflict and instability. When children are pushed out of classrooms by war, displacement or climate disaster, the consequences are long-lasting. And the scale of this crisis is severe. More than 272 million children and young people are out of school worldwide, a figure projected to rise to 278 million due to global aid cuts. I will give way.
The Honourable Lady made a very powerful point about the number of children globally who are outside of the classroom and the impact that has. It also happens in our own country as well, and I recently visited the Guildford Centre in my Carlisle constituency, which is the pupil referral unit. They do phenomenal work, and unlike other schools, the hallmark of their success is actually their pupils leaving the Guildford Centre and going back into mainstream education. So does the Honourable Lady agree with me that pupil referral units like the Guildford Centre make a huge contribution to closing that opportunity gap that we know exists abroad but also here at home?
I thank the Honourable Member for her contribution. I 100% agree with you. Let us not forget in our country that there are children that are left behind. In my own constituency of Esher and Walton, we found 1,800 children that were missing school because of SEND needs. The work of the referral units is brilliant in bringing those children back into the mainstream education, and it is good for our economy and growth. So around the world then, we have children missing education, and the global aid cuts will increase that, and that increase will be concentrated in humanitarian hotspots. Education systems are being strained by the combined impact of conflict, climate shocks and humanitarian collapse. Last year alone, 242 million students in 85 countries saw their schooling disrupted by climate events. Education is not a luxury. It underpins development, public health, gender equality and long-term stability. Yet global commitment is weakening just as pressures on education systems intensify. An international education fund is projected to fall by $3.2 billion this year. That's a 24% cut, placing an additional 5.7 million children at risk of dropping out of school. Cuts to USAID alone are expected to push 23 million children out of education in the years ahead. And girls will be hardest hit, with gender-focused education aid projected to fall by 28% this year, despite clear evidence that educating girls delivers some of the highest returns of any development investment. And at the same time, primary education funding faces a 34% cut, with severe long-term consequences for literacy, numeracy and economic growth. And against this backdrop, the government's decision to cut the aid budget to the lowest level this century will only deepen the global education crisis, undermining long-term stability, prosperity and the UK's influence abroad. With aid projected to fall to 0.3% of national income by 2027, education funding is already being squeezed, with overseas education spending set to drop by 40% this year alone. At the same time, 1/5 of the aid budget is now spent on in-country refugee costs, crowding out overseas investment, precisely the spending that helps prevent instability and forced displacement in the first place. Britain has not always stood on the sidelines. For many years, the UK was a leading global voice on education, particularly on girls' education, backing that leadership with sustained multilateral investment. Between 2015 and 2020 alone, UK aid helped more than 15 million children attend school worldwide. And now let me illustrate some of the scale of the crisis by pointing to some of the worst affected global examples. Nowhere is the global collapse in education more stark than in Afghanistan, where more than 2 million girls are formally banned from secondary and higher education, making it the only country in the world to legally exclude girls from school, while learning incomes for boys deteriorate amid systemic breakdown. And this education collapse has been worsened by the collapse of international aid. The United States has effectively disengaged from Afghanistan, while British aid to the country has fallen by nearly half over the past 5 years. And in the Gaza Strip, more than 650,000 children, almost the entire school-age population, have received little or no formal education for years, with around 97% of the schools damaged or destroyed. UNRWA, long the backbone of education for Palestinian refugee children, educating over 500,000 children in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, are now operating under severe legal and operational constraints imposed by the Israeli government, including bans in East Jerusalem, the demolition of facilities and restrictions of staff, utilities and partner NGOs. And in the DRC, where more than 7 million children are already out of school due to conflict and displacement, a flagship girls' education programme previously supported by British aid is set to close this year, affecting 170,000 children, the vast majority of them girls, in a single region as a direct consequence of our aid cuts. In fragile and conflict-affected states, education is not only about future opportunity, it provides safety, routine and dignity now. Schools often deliver clean water, meals, sanitation and access to child protection services. Yet globally, school feeding programmes face cuts of more than 50%, while education in emergencies has been reduced by 24%, with countries such as Haiti, Somalia and the Central African Republic losing aid equivalent to over 10% of their public education budgets. It should not and does not have to be this way. The Liberal Democrats believe education must be a protected priority within their aid budget, not a discretionary extra. But that requires reversing the aid cuts and setting out a clear path back to the legally enshrined target of 0.7% of national income on aid. And I would respectfully point out to the Honourable Member for Romford that while I agree with his words on the British Council and the potential cuts to their budget, and on the influence of British education, it is impossible to see how this could be done on the cuts that his party are proposing to bring it down to 0.1% of GNI spent on ODA. Yeah. The International Day of Education is a reminder that behind every statistic is a child whose future depends on political choices. If we are serious about reducing poverty, empowering women and building stability, which will then in turn benefit the UK in providing economic opportunities globally to markets, to trade with, less compelling reasons for migration to these shores, and more global stability and security for our citizens. For that, education must move from the margins to the centre of our international priorities. Thank you.
Yeah. Now come to wind-ups, and the front bench have 10 minutes each. The Lib Dem spokesperson, Caroline Voden.
Thank you, Ms Vaz. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, and thank you to the member for Southgate and Wood Green for leading this debate today. What is education for? It's about so much more than remembering facts to pass exams. It is about lighting a spark in our children, fostering their creative spirit and critical thinking to ensure that every child grows up with the life skills, the confidence and resilience they need to be happy, healthy and successful adults, however that looks for them. This, in my view at least, is every bit as important as academic achievement. And in line with this year's International Day of Education theme, the power of youth in co-creating education, we should all seek to create an educational environment which allows children the world over to learn and to ignite that spark. The Liberal Democrats believe that education is the best investment we can make in our children's potential and our country's future, and every country's future. It is the root of everything that follows in adult life, the potential for better health, the ability to work and earn a living, the skills that enable people to participate in work and sport and craft and music and all the things that enrich a human life. And as the International Day of Education celebrates, education also has a significant role in enabling peace and development. The United Nations Sustainable Development Goal 4 recognises education as a foundation for escaping poverty and fostering peaceful, healthy societies. When a girl goes to school, she is not only more likely to achieve higher educational outcomes, that much would seem obvious, but to earn more and contribute to economic growth, to participate in decision-making within her community and her country. She will be healthier, as will her children. She is less likely to be subject to child marriage, to experience harmful practices and unwanted pregnancy. And since the Sustainable Development Goals were set in 2015, girls' enrolment has increased by more than 50 million globally, with 5 million more girls completing each level of education annually up to upper secondary. However, there are still more than 100 million girls of school age across the world who are not in formal education today. And one of the worst examples, as other members have said, is in Afghanistan, where over 2.2 million girls are officially barred from attending school. Afghanistan is the only country in the world where girls and women are prohibited from accessing secondary and higher education. And as families lose hope for their daughters' futures, there has been a rise in forced and child marriages. Girls are kept hidden and silenced. The Liberal Democrats want to see a foreign policy agenda with gender equality at its heart. The lives of women and girls must not be ignored in favour of trade or regional alliances, and we call on the government to immediately restore full funding to educational programmes that support women and girls. I'm sure that I'm not alone to be deeply troubled at the lack of visibility of women on the world stage at this very difficult time, helping to build peace and reconciliation in various conflict zones. As President Trump builds his so-called Board of Peace, it looks like there will be more male billionaires represented than women. Where are the women who will speak up for their local communities and civil society? The women who have a deep and vested interest in securing peace and stability for their children's future. Evidence shows that women's participation in peace agreements increases the probability of them lasting at least 2 years by 20%. And lasting 15 years by 35%. Yet in a UN study in 15 of 16 national dialogues examined, the decision-making was left to a small group of male leaders. And we see that every day on our TV screens today. And I suggest this starts with education. If we don't give girls the tools and the knowledge to grow up being part of that conversation, we embed this dangerous imbalance and perpetuate in boys the idea that theirs are the only voices that matter. But perhaps the lesser told story is that looking globally, there is an almost equal number of boys who are out of school worldwide, and the biggest disparity is poverty related. In the poorest countries, 36% of students are out of school compared to 3% in the richest countries, and almost 3/4 of the global out-of-school population is in Central and Southern Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. And the astonishing and moving example given to us by the member for Bishop Auckland just shows how education can not only transform lives, but communities and countries. The UK has such an important role to play in reducing this stark international educational inequality. As proud internationalists, Liberal Democrats believe that our country thrives when we are open and outward-looking, and this applies so much to education. Liberal Democrats value the UK's central role in founding UNESCO, and we remain steadfast in supporting its mission to contribute to peace and security by promoting collaboration among nations through education, science and culture. But most importantly, we want to restore the UK's reputation as an international development superpower by returning spending to 0.7% of national income and re-establishing an international development department. We would also recognise the role of education as a force for good by committing to spend 15% of ODA on education in the world's most vulnerable areas. But we should not just focus on what the UK can provide to the world on education, but also what we can learn from the world to improve our own system. The part of our own education system which is in the worst shape is the way we educate our children who have additional needs and disabilities. Broken by the previous Conservative government, the SEND system is failing these children every single day. Years of cuts to school and council budgets have left parents struggling to secure the support their children need, and the system has become intrinsically adversarial, pitting council and parents against each other in a situation which is not fair on either of them. It urgently needs reform, and it's welcome that the government recognises that, but it is so incredibly important that the government gets this right. So I urge the government to look overseas for inspiration. On a recent trip to Ontario as part of the Education Select Committee's inquiry into SEND, we saw a significant focus on communication right from kindergarten. Parents there do not have to fight for support because dialogue works. Families are listened to and behaviour is seen as a form of communication. In Ontario, they understand that we must listen to what our SEND children are trying to tell us, focusing on inclusion rather than exclusion. Their approach was worlds away from our own combative system. I therefore hope that when the government comes forward with its schools white paper to set out SEND reform, that it will draw on the success stories of SEND systems overseas, like Ontario, to create a system which truly places children, young people, families and carers at its core. And our education system should also draw on world-class internationally recognised programmes which are used around the world, such as the International Baccalaureate Diploma Programme. The IB sets a global benchmark for education and is trusted by universities, employers and educators worldwide. So the government's recent decision to slash the large programme uplift funding, which allows state schools to provide the IB, simply makes no sense. The money saved is a drop in the ocean of the overall Department for Education budget. But by stripping this funding away, the government is stealing opportunity and further entrenching the divide between our state and private schools. No government that wants to truly close the attainment gap would pursue this move. And that's why the Liberal Democrats are calling on the government to reverse the cuts to the large programme uplift and ensure that any school wishing to deliver the IB diploma has the funding to do so. But zooming out to look at our education system more broadly, it's fair to say that, like the rest of the world, we also suffer from persistent levels of educational inequality. Far too many children are leaving school without the skills they need to succeed. The disadvantage gap we see when children walk through the school door on day one grows throughout the educational years and is wider at 16 than it is at age 5, according to research from the Education Policy Institute, and it is down to us to fix this stubborn inequality. The Institute for Fiscal Studies notes that the gap in GCSE attainment between rich and poor households in this country has remained largely constant for the past 20 years. To address the current failings in our education system that are leading to this inequality, the Liberal Democrats are calling on the government to take several steps, including a tutoring guarantee for every disadvantaged pupil who needs extra support, high-quality early years education to help close the attainment gap by giving disadvantaged children aged 3 and 4 an extra 5 free hours a week, and tripling the early years pupil premium to £1,000 a year. But to conclude, Madam Chair, we want to see a government that fulfils its role to help reverse the worrying trends we see in global educational inequality, especially when it comes to women and girls, to look overseas at what the world can do for our own education system, and to properly address the educational inequalities that also persist here in the UK. We must ensure that every child's education provides the tools they need to thrive in every aspect of their life.
Congratulations on your new post. Opposition spokesperson Lincoln Job.
Thank you, Ms Vaz, for that welcome, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I congratulate the member for Southgate and Wood Green, who was also the chair of the APPG on global education, for securing this debate today and for his long-standing interest in this matter. I'd also like to thank the member for Romford for his gracious words of welcome, particularly because he was due to be standing at this dispatch box. And when I saw him walk into the Westminster Hall, I have to admit my blood ran slightly cold, worrying that perhaps our shared team had prepared the same speech for us both to give. I should have known better. On this side of the House, we recognise the huge benefits that education brings to supporting aspiration and helping to fulfil potential. Whether at home or abroad, we know that education lays the foundation for young people to have better futures. Here in England, the last Conservative government raised standards in our schools and lifted the UK's standing in international league tables for literacy to first in the Western world and fourth in the world. We also increased the number of full-time teachers by around 27,000, which is about 2,000 a year on average, a higher annual rate of growth than the 6,500 over 5 years promised by the current government. And internationally, we played our part in supporting initiatives to lift people out of poverty. With the United Nations International Day of Education approaching on the 24th of January, this is now an opportune moment to reflect on the links between education and economic development and the role that the UK can play. Honourable and right honourable members will be aware of the UN's Sustainable Development Goal number 4, which focuses on quality education to, and I quote, ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. The last government focused efforts and resources on this area, including expanding and improving access to education, especially for women and girls, who we all know face particular barriers in a number of parts of the world to securing a meaningful education and childhood. This led to 19.8 million children, including 10 girls, being supported with a decent education since 2015. That will have had a profound difference, made a profound difference to those lives. And the International Women and Girls Strategy, launched in 2023, had a strong focus on education. This strategy highlighted the wider societal benefits of improved education for women and girls in developing countries, including that a child whose mother can read is 50% more likely to live beyond the age of 5, more likely to be immunised, and about twice as likely to attend school. Girls benefiting from higher levels of education are also less likely to be affected by violence from a partner, less likely to marry as a child, and more likely to find employment and start businesses. One of the great untapped potentials in developing countries is the enterprise and entrepreneurial spirit of women, and better education can help unleash that potential. This is something that members on all sides of the House can agree on. That strategy also focused on the 3 E's of educating girls, empowering women and girls, championing their health and rights, and ending gender-based violence. But education is the essential first step. So can I ask the Minister, is the government committed to implementing that strategy? And with international development budgets understandably being reduced at this time to support the efforts to bolster our defences and national security, can the Minister give an update on the areas that they intend to focus resources on for the rest of this decade? Now, my team and I had prepared a rather different speech, but I've been very struck by the fact that 4 members here have mentioned Afghanistan. And so if the Chamber will indulge me, I like the sponsor of this debate, would like to understand from the Minister what the government is doing in terms of education in Syria, Iran, Gaza and the West Bank, and Sudan. But I want to tell a rather different story about international education. It's the year 2009, and we are in the Helmand River Valley in Afghanistan. And there is a place called Basharan. And Basharan has a small village there with a defunct school. And a young company commander from the Welsh Guards by the name of Sean Burchill took over that area in 2009 and was determined that that school should open for boys and girls. And he spent vast amounts of time trying to, going backwards and forwards at great risk to Lashkar in order to try to get the education department there to provide a teacher, to provide books, to provide chairs and school equipment. And he was killed. He was killed by a bomb, leaving a widow and an 18-month-old son called Charlie. But nevertheless, his men and women in his company of Welsh Guards continued with that extraordinary work, and the school got up and running. Fast forward to April the next year. I'm the commanding officer of the Lashkar Battle Group, and we have Basharan in our patch. And very near, one of the routes into Basharan was a road, and it was impassable. The Taliban had put a tax office on it, and they had seeded it with a number of improvised explosive devices. I was given the mission to clear the road. I discussed it with the company commander. I said, well, it looks to me like we now need to start at one end and go to the other, or start at the other end and go to the other. And he said, let me have a think. And he said, right, I want to start in the middle and clear out in two directions. I said, right, okay. Because by taking it, the Taliban tax office would send a signal to the area that there was greater control. And this involves a lot of moving people around and moving a lot of equipment, and this alerted the locals that this was happening. And so I was at the checkpoint nearest to where we were going to start the operation the next day. And a young Lance Corporal called Cami, he sent a message saying, commanding officer to the front gate. And so I went down, and my approach to counterinsurgency, and I told the battalion this, was we need to take risks to be safer. It's one of the paradoxes of counterinsurgency. It's incredibly dangerous, but nevertheless, it can bear results. Anyway, Cami introduced me to a fella with a wooden leg, a local, who'd come to the gate, who'd said, what's going on? And Cami said, and I'm going to tell him. He didn't ask me. He said, I'm going to tell him the plan for tomorrow. I said, crack on. And so he told him the plan, that we were going to go in the next day and take down the tax office, and we were going to clear the bombs. But we knew it was very dangerous indeed. And he was known as the Mujahideen, said, well, I'm going to come with you tomorrow, dawn, and I'm going to show you where the bombs are. And we all had a fitful night's sleep, and the next morning, I asked him, I said, why are you going to do that? It's incredibly risky. And he said, I will show you where the bombs are so that you can clear them, so that you can open the road, and my daughter can go to Basharan school. And good as gold, the next day at dawn, he turned up, and we gave him a spray can of yellow spray paint. And he hopscotched his way around a high-density minefield and put paint on where the bombs were. And it is so rare for the good that we enable off the security line of operations, namely in education, to play so directly into local consent in order to advance the cause and the British interest. The UK aid flag and our support for education should be a sign of hope and freedom for those who receive it. We have had strong success in recent years delivering quality education for those who need it across the world and provide new opportunities for millions. Along with our key partners, the UK should continue to play a leading role, exercising our resources, leverage and expertise to improve educational outcomes, to lift millions globally out of poverty and into a better future.
Thank you. Minister Stephen Doughty.
Well, thank you, Ms Vaz, and pleasure to see you in the chair. And I'm particularly grateful to my honourable friend, the member for Southgate and Wood Green, for securing this debate ahead of the UN's International Day of Education. This is indeed a topic close to my own heart as the son of a primary school teacher and a youth worker, and having engaged in a number of educational initiatives myself over many years, including teaching English one summer in Ukraine, which I will come back to. And I really want to thank the members for the sincere and passionate contributions they've made on this absolutely crucial issue. Of course, education is important to us all in our own constituencies. The Liberal Democrat spokesperson spoke of a number of the issues around education in the UK. I'm, of course, hugely proud of schools and educational institutions in my own communities, in Cardiff South and Penarth, and the investment that's gone in from the Welsh Labour government there into new schools and new further education, college and many, many other respects. But of course, we're largely talking today about international efforts on education. And I think when we think of not only the very powerful examples that the honourable gentleman opposite just raised, and I visited Afghanistan at the very, very same time he was serving gallantly, and I thank him for his service there at that time, because under the last Labour government I served as an advisor in the former Department for International Development and worked on Afghanistan policy, and indeed on many of the issues and ways we tried to support particularly girls' education in Afghanistan back then, and I've been in many of the places he was describing. And I thought too also of the context today, not only for tragically, for the people in Afghanistan, and particularly those young girls today, but also of the young people that I engaged with just last week in a live video conference linking up Stratford Manor Primary School in East London with a school in Kiev as part of the school twinning programme under the 100-year partnership that we have. It's now reaching up to 300 schools. But it was really, really powerful to speak to those young children live on camera with the children in London who told us about the massive bombardment they had faced the night before in and around their schools and their homes in Kiev, thanks to Russia's barbarism, but also that they were only lucky that they could join us at that moment because they've most of the time had no electricity at their school or heating. So the stark challenges faced by children around the world who deserve education are very, very clear to me, and that includes in Gaza and Sudan. I won't, because I'm going to make some progress, but I will potentially take some interventions later. But I think we do need to think, and of course, in whether it's in Gaza, whether it's in Sudan, whether it's in many of the other locations that have been mentioned. And I worked previously in the international development sector for a Christian international development charity, World Vision, but also for Oxfam, and indeed engaged with many educational programmes around the world. And I've seen the real difference that not only UK assistance has made, but also international organisations under the United Nations, but also, of course, many of the excellent charities we have here in this country. And also, many members reflected on the really important work of the British Council and also our scholarship programmes. And I really have done a lot of work with Chevening Scholars and Marshall Scholars, and amongst others, Commonwealth Scholars, of course. I'm also really proud that this government is taking us back into the Erasmus Plus programme in terms of the opportunities for international exchange and engagement. It's crucial not only for young people in Britain, but also for those long-standing partnerships that make us strong and understood and speak to our values in the world. Now, as advocates for global education, members here know all too well the system's in a serious crisis. UNESCO, which was mentioned, estimates that every $1 invested in education and youth skills in developing countries generates $10 to $15 dollars in economic growth. Education has also been central, of course, to reducing inequality, empowering women and girls. We know the impact that that has. And yet, 272 million children are out of school globally, and 70% of children in low and middle-income countries are unable to read and understand a basic text by 10, and that rises to 90% in sub-Saharan Africa. And, of course, that has to change. But with better research, evidence on what works, a range of different interventions, partners working together, countries working together, we can make a difference, and particularly taking on board new technologies and new ways of accessing curriculum and learning. And of course, we are part of that effort, building modern and respectful partnerships, but also from shifting from being a direct donor in many circumstances to acting as an investor, as an advisor, and as a convener. But we will always retain our focus on reaching the most marginalised children who need and deserve that quality education. For example, in Sierra Leone, we're working with the government to build gender-based violence prevention and response, especially also work with children with disabilities facing gender-based violence. We're helping partner governments finance and manage their own education systems more effectively, and we're using world-class evidence to improve teaching in the classroom to ensure children are learning. And our people and our expertise and the great strength we have in education in this country means we are trusted advisors to partner governments. And we funded pioneering research, particularly on that issue of foundational learning that my honourable friend referred to, and in many, many other areas too. We're also a founding partner of the Global Coalition for Foundational Learning, working closely with UNICEF, UNESCO, the World Bank, Gates Foundation and other governments, all working together. We're, of course, a founding member of the Global Partnership for Education, which was referenced. We were at the forefront of setting up Education Cannot Wait, which has done very, very important work. And also, we are continuing to deliver through a range of multilateral investments. But we have had to take tough decisions, and those were referenced by a number of members. We took the tough decision to reduce our ODA spending to 0.3% of GNI by 2027 so we could respond to pressing security challenges and geopolitical circumstances that members are only too familiar with. And of course, with less funding, we need to do things differently. We've got to focus on greatest impact, and we need to really, really target on the people who need it the most. And we're focusing on 5 areas. Firstly, I won't if that's okay. Firstly, improving learning outcomes for all children, particularly targeting girls, the most disadvantaged. Second, helping partner governments to strengthen their education systems. Third, increasing the scale and sources of financing so that governments can access their own finances to fund education reforms. And, of course, safeguarding education in emergencies and protracted crises, including those affected by conflict and climate change. And finally, of course, driving reform of multilateral education organisations. And I'll say a little bit more about that conflict work in a moment. And we're also, of course, leading in terms of our own strategy. On the 20th of this month, the government announced its new international education strategy, which builds on that strong leadership we have and skills and expertise that we have. Of course, education already contributes more than 32 billion a year to the UK economy, and our strategy sets out a plan to increase that to 40 billion by 2030, generating jobs and skills here in the UK as well. So we have expertise, we have leadership, we have commitment. We're in a different circumstance relating to the funding, and I think members understand that, but we are going to continue to remain focused on these issues. There are a number of points raised which I just want to turn to in the last few minutes. My honourable friend and many others raised the question about work in emergencies and protracted crises, and we recognise very much that this is a huge challenge. Of course, we're continuing to focus on that area. We've committed to a further 10 million for strategic partnerships on education in emergencies. And we're, of course, at the moment the largest bilateral donor to the Global Partnership for Education. And 5.6 million of that, for example, is earmarked towards education and psychosocial support in Gaza and the West Bank. Of course, absolutely tragic circumstances in Afghanistan, but even there, we continue to support the delivery of education through UNICEF, IRC and other partners, and all through the Afghanistan Resilience Trust Fund. So continue to try and work in what are incredibly difficult circumstances and a tragedy for girls in particular there. I mentioned foundational learning, which my honourable friend raised. He asked me about the future of the Development Conference in May this year. The agenda is still being finalised for that, but we'll update him in due course, and indeed the House. We are, of course, looking at new ways to generate in-resource in that strained circumstance. So, for example, our support for the International Finance Facility for Education has already unlocked an additional $1 billion in additional education finance from multilateral development banks, and that's very, very good money for the value for money for the UK taxpayer, because $1 of cash invested there generally leverages in $7 extra additional concessional finance. I can absolutely assure members that we will continue to stay focused on girls' education and indeed those most marginalised and least likely to be in schools. Absolutely agree the British Council is an important partner, and of course will help deliver that international education strategy. I visited the British Council team in Kiev, actually, myself, who then tragically their offices were also hit by one of the Russian strikes. Our funding to the British Council is still under discussion. And of course, that commitment internationally is matched by the commitment we have to young people in this country. I mentioned the investment that we're putting in. I mentioned the focus that the government has on this. And of course, it's not just in the schools in terms of teaching and in terms of facilities and in terms of curriculum. It's also about ensuring that young people have a best place to learn. And of course, that's why we've put 750 primary school breakfast clubs in place and extended free school meals to 500,000 more children, which I'm incredibly proud of, drawing on a lot of our lessons around this in Wales, indeed. So we're proud of what we're doing on education in this country. We're proud of what we're doing internationally. These are changed financial circumstances, but we will continue to focus resource where we think it can make the biggest difference for the most marginalised communities and to leverage in support from other donors. And I really wanted to thank all members for the sincerity of the points they made today.
Thank you. Bashara Lambos to wind up.
Thank you, Mr. Vaz, and I want to thank all the members that have contributed today. It's been a wide-ranging debate, and we've had lots of incredible insights into what education means. So particularly from one friend, the member from Bishop Auckland, he talked about the young man who was at the rubbish tip in Kigali, who's now got a Harvard scholarship. So that's an incredible story. And obviously the opposition spokesperson, the member for Spelthorne, on his personal experience in Afghanistan, which is incredibly moving. It shows how much people value education no matter where they're from and how much a difference it makes to parents as well as to children. I also want to thank the honourable member for Isha and Morton, and she made a point right at the very start. We also need to thank teachers. Teachers are a very important part of providing education. There's a huge shortage of teachers internationally, and that's another area that we need to focus on. She made some excellent points in her speech, particularly about, I think everyone made the point about how important girls' education is everywhere, and that's something we need to focus on. And obviously, the honourable member for Romford made the point about the importance of soft power and the British Council in particular, but also scholarship schemes like Chevening and historically the Rhodes Scholarship Scheme as well. So I think we've had a really good debate. I want to thank the Minister for his responses. There's a few issues that I'll be very keen to follow up on. Times are hard, but we need to make sure that education, which is so transformative and does change people's lives, carries on making that difference, because it is one of the most essential things that you can provide funding for. And I also want to thank all my colleagues on the APPG for global education, particularly Results UK, who provide the Secretariat for that, and all the other organisations who support things like Send My Friend to School and other campaign organisations for education. I'll leave it there, and thanks everyone for taking part.
The question is that this House has considered the International Day of Education. As many as that are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order. The sitting stands adjourned.